Hi guys, I'm Ahana and welcome back to my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to be talking about something that's a little more personal than perhaps in my last video. So this one's going to be on the topic of mental health, and particularly how to manage your mental health as a startup founder. And as a startup founder, the problems that I'll be talking about that I've faced are more specific to entrepreneurs, but really anyone who's going through a tough time, specifically when it comes to your career or work. Hopefully some of my tips will help as well. The way I'll be structuring this video is I'll start by talking about some of the mental health struggles that I've had so far on my own entrepreneurial journey. And then I'll be going into my 5 practical tips for dealing with and managing your mental health. So let's jump into what I've gone through on my journey so far. Now, prior to my startup, I've been very fortunate to not have suffered too badly with my mental health. I think the worst I've probably been mentally was early on at university. University was very hard for me, and I certainly had academic confidence issues to the point that in my first year before my exams, I would basically get panic attacks and cry. The thought of going to tutorials would just tie my stomach up in knots, and I would feel so sick at the thought of having to do problem sheets in front of my friends and potentially just embarrass myself because I didn't know how to do them. 9 out of 10 times, I'd also cried when talking to my personal tutor about my grades. So of course it sucked, but it was quite isolated to crunch points and academics and grades. I was pretty emotionally and mentally stable in every other facet of my life. The kind of sad thing is that this experience, although pretty bad, is not that different to many other Imperial Physics students. And I know it's awful to say, but misery does love company. And to know that it wasn't just me who was having these feelings when it came to my academics did actually help me in a way get through some of these struggles. But my point being that aside from my physics degree, I hadn't really had any experiences that had shaped me into prioritizing my mental health. That said, having now worked on my startup for almost a year, I can definitely say that whilst the highs are very, very high with a career path like this, the lows, as you can probably predict, are pretty low, and you feel very personally responsible for failures, or when things go wrong, you tend to blame yourself quite a lot. Now again, I'd say as a person, I'm generally not that easily rattled and quite level-headed in most situations. But your job as a startup founder is incredibly high pressure, and even though you may be talking to people all day, it can actually be quite a lonely experience as well. The types of situations that you have to deal with as a founder can be pretty traumatic, and that can be from making a bad hire to having to break bad news to someone, or just fundraising in general. In fact, I think fundraising has been one of the toughest times for me, mentally and emotionally. I touched on this in my intro to fundraising video, so check that out if you haven't already. After doing 10 meetings a day for 2 months straight, I was in a really bad place, physically and mentally. In fact, it got to a point that it was so bad and I so desperately wanted a break from these incessant meetings and due diligence requests that there was this conference, this tech conference happening in London. And silly me thought that a great way to get away from the thought of fundraising would be to go to a tech conference with founders and investors to talk about fundraising. But in any case, I plucked up the courage to block my calendar that day and go connect with other founders. And actually the first panel talk that day was a panel of founders. Most of them were sort of around the Series A stage and had executed on successful seed rounds. And the panel was all about fundraising. And even though their experiences were so similar to mine, and you know how I said misery loves company? Well, I loved the panel, and it made me realize that a lot of the things that I was going through weren't that unique to me. They were very, very similar. I was just so emotionally exhausted and in a weak mental state that after the panel, I went up to the panelists just to thank them and just tell them that I was really grateful for them sharing their experiences. And as soon as I went up to them, in the middle of this swanky office in Blackfriars, I just burst straight into tears. Now, they were really sweet and understanding and kind about it, but my point is that sometimes it can just be tough. And in that situation, I wasn't crying because anything was wrong, and the round was even going relatively well, but I was just exhausted, and I was feeling really, really burnt out. And not just mentally, but even physically. I felt so unhealthy during this period where I would literally eat all meals at my desk. I would not take a single step elsewhere. And I was also just feeling incredibly anxious. I have notifications on my Apple Watch, on my phone, and on my laptop, and every time I get an email notification, my heart would just jump out of my chest and I'd get so nervous and sweaty for no apparent reason. And when you're physically unhealthy, that contributes and makes your mental health feel even worse. When I said fundraising is hard, that's what I meant. Another thing that a lot of founders can feel is loneliness, and I touched on this earlier. And I have to say that for this specifically, I've been very, very lucky to have such a strong support system of my friends, my family, my boyfriend. I have a lot of people that I can talk to about how I'm feeling. And in fact, I do talk to about how I'm feeling. But something a lot of the founders that I chat with talk about is, even though you're talking to people pretty much all day long, it's your job as a founder to be creating these opportunities. You're not really socializing with people. And especially during the pandemic in small remote companies, you're not going out and chatting over a lunch break or going out on a Friday night with your work colleagues to the pub. Every meeting that you have tends to have an agenda, and even if you do schedule time in for company virtual socials, it still doesn't necessarily have the same feel to it when you are alone by yourself in a room. So behind all the glitz and the glamour of being a startup founder, there are downsides to the job. And to be honest, I still believe that to do a job like this, you have to be the type of person that really loves what you do and is willing to work very, very hard. But the thing that you need to remember is that there's no company without you, especially not at the early stage. And this is why it's so important to develop those coping mechanisms early on. As you grow and scale, the problems only get bigger, the timescales get longer, the amounts of money get larger, and you really need to be able to deal with a lot of stress. So adopting those healthy habits early will keep you working in a sustainable way and allow you not only to be the best version of yourself, but that translates into your work and your company, your startup, your baby, and will probably have positive effects on the company itself. So I'm now going to go over my top 5 coping mechanisms that have really helped me as a founder navigating some of these challenging times and difficult experiences. My first tip is to try and reframe your situation mentally. Now, I appreciate this is much easier said than done, but if you allow yourself to change your perspective, change the way you view a situation, ultimately that's the only real thing that you can control. If you've been put in a situation, the only thing you can control is your response to that situation. You can't control the outcome necessarily, meaning that how you view it is actually very, very important. Let's take the example of fundraising. As I've said, it sucked. It was hard, it was difficult mentally, difficult physically. But then I realized at the age of 22, it is my job to ask investors for large amounts of money so I can have my dream job and build my dream company. That is such a privileged position to be in. And I think just viewing it that way, that whether an investor says yes or no at the end of the meeting, this is an opportunity for me at this early stage in my career to make a name for myself in the investment and startup world. Have these incredible people who have years of experience and massive networks and have seen companies grow and scale actually sit down and talk about me. How many other jobs would give me that kind of an opportunity? Whether this is true or not, whether I could have had different opportunities had I gone down a different career path, just viewing it this way makes it so much more fun for me going into an investor meeting, because I'm not looking at it as a transaction anymore. I'm not looking at it as a binary outcome that, okay, if they invest, great, love this person. If they don't, goodbye, never want to talk to you again. It's much more that this conversation is an opportunity. And if I can, I'm going to try to learn something from it, and I'm going to try and connect and build a rapport with this investor. And what will come, will come. But all I can do is enjoy myself and put the best version of myself forward, which in turn should have the best outcome for my startup, for my company. My second coping mechanism is that you should prioritize your health pretty much above everything. And there are 3 main buckets here. The first is physical activity, the second is eating well, and the third is sleeping enough. And I know it can be really hard. As I talked about, I was definitely one for skipping meals or just snacking all the time when I get hungry and doing absolutely no physical exercise and also not sleeping very much. But again, when you start to see the effects of an unhealthy lifestyle permeating in your body, you feel awful. And again, there is no company without you, which is why it's so important that you take care of your physical health. And the way I've done that is I block time in my calendar, which again was such a difficult thing for me to do at the time, thinking, oh my gosh, are my investors going to be upset that I've blocked an hour in the morning to do exercise? Are they going to be upset that I've blocked 30 minutes for my lunch? And I thought, you know what? This is absolutely ridiculous. I work until pretty late anyway. I work the whole day and I get my work done. The pace at which we're moving is incredible. And it's just me applying this arbitrary pressure to myself. Eating is a human right. I don't think anyone's going to be upset if I make time to do that. It can be really helpful to try and get in a routine, make it a habit, and try and really just embrace a healthy lifestyle. And if, like me, you are a bit of a workaholic, look at it as this will optimize your work performance. When you're in a good space mentally, physically, you feel more confident, and that permeates in your meetings. It comes across in conversation, and looking at it that way has really helped me. My third practical tip, and this I only really did in those very worst crunch points, was to turn off my notifications, which I know seems crazy when it is my job to respond to emails and be hyper responsive in general, but I'm sat at my laptop all day anyway, so I'm not going to miss a message when it comes through. But just that feeling, just the way that my heart reacts when I would get a message, when I would get that email sound, was not worth it. So in that period where it was causing this ridiculous anxiety for no apparent reason, I just switched off my notifications. And yes, my heart would still jump out of my chest when I opened my inbox and refresh it, as I would. But at least it gave me some control over this physical response that I felt like I had no control over. The more I did that, the more that I got myself into a better headspace, the more I could deal with these things again. And now my notifications are back on and it doesn't bother me at all. But there was a period when it really did. And sometimes you just go through hard times, and if there are small things that you can do that won't really impact the performance of your work, but will just make you feel better, however silly it is, I would embrace them. The fourth coping mechanism that I want to talk about is that you should talk about your feelings. And I know that having a fantastic support network of friends and family and loved ones is something that should never be taken for granted. And if you have that, you should absolutely use it. Let your loved ones in on your life and what's going on. And I think you'd be surprised however little they may understand about the world of startups or venture. Just you talking about how you're feeling can lift a weight off your chest and actually bring you closer to the people around you as you just become more open and honest and feel like you can truly be yourself. So if this isn't something that you already do, try to look within your friend circle and try to have those deeper conversations with those people around you that you can trust. Then on the company side itself, something that can be very helpful is to have founder syncs or meetings on a regular basis with your core team members where the agenda is to talk about how you're feeling. It can be so hard at an early stage startup where there are 1,000,001 fires to put out at any given time, and you just always need to talk business. There is always a million things on the agenda. But if you schedule the time where you will not talk about work per se, you're just there to talk about how you're feeling, how you're doing, and how you can support one another. That can also be a really healthy way of having someone to talk to and also finding proactive solutions to some of the problems that you may be facing as part of your job in a startup. And my fifth and final tip is to have another thing to do for when you're very, very stressed out. And by another, I mean something that's not intrinsically healthy, like going on a run or to the gym or cooking something really healthy. I mean some form of activity that you just really enjoy. And the reason I'm saying to go above and beyond the basics of exercising and eating is because those are really basics. You should be doing those to maintain a generally healthy lifestyle. But having just one more thing that, if a crunch point comes, you can rely on to calm you down, that can be extremely powerful. You should try as best as you can to integrate healthy habits into your lifestyle, such as exercising and eating well and sleeping well. But beyond that, when you get into a really difficult time or a crunch point, you don't want to take your healthy habits, things that you should be doing anyway, as your coping mechanism. Which is why I think it's super important to have something else that you can do that can almost be your secret weapon in times of trouble or stress, that you do, you feel better, and you can power through. The reason that this is so important is that founders can fall into really unhealthy coping mechanisms, as can anyone, whether that's alcohol or performance-enhancing drugs. If you can control what that coping mechanism is and make sure it's away from things like that can actually end pretty badly for you, then it's better you spend an hour of your life doing something unproductive than fall into these really unhealthy coping mechanisms. So for me, that's League of Legends. When I get really stressed or really burnt out, I play a game of League. It takes me about 30 minutes depending on how well or badly I play, but that almost always will just calm me down, give me something else to focus on for that time period, and I will always feel more energized, or at least ready to get back into work after playing a game. If you can find what that is for you, whether that's playing a musical instrument or gardening or painting, whatever it is, just having an activity that will reliably calm you down. So those are my top 5 coping mechanisms. And I'm gonna add a slight bonus one on here. I want you to know that it's also okay not to be okay sometimes. I think every founder I've ever spoken to has gone through highs and lows, and that is totally normal. In fact, you're probably doing something right if that's the experience that you're having. And so the thing to remember there is if you are going through a very difficult situation as a founder, you're not alone and you're probably doing something right. And in fact, I hope that me sharing at the beginning of this video some of the things that I've gone through, some of my own mental health struggles during this journey, can help you relate or at least just normalize some of these feelings when going through difficult experiences. I think hearing about what other founders have gone through has really helped me, and so hopefully this video will help some of you if you are going through a hard time or just generally want to make sure that if you're embarking on this career path that you have strategies in place for when things inevitably do get difficult. But that's where I'm going to leave this video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content just like this. Alright, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.